Hi, welcome to this short video on what you need to know about taking the NCLEX in 2020 during and after the pandemic for COVID-19. Now, first of all, the two biggest areas you're going to be concerned about are how do you schedule your NCLEX and what are the actual changes to your NCLEX. Now, the timeline for US and Canada, because nursing students in Canada and the United States take the same NCLEX. So when the COVID-19 pandemic was established, this impacted both the RN and the PN exams. So they initially closed the centers and then they started reopening a very limited number of sites on March 25th. Now these changes that I'm going to talk to you about in this video will stay in place through July of 2020. That's all we know up to this point is through July of 2020. Now, you might be asking why center. Hi, if you're watching this video, you're interested in finding out what are the changes to the NCLEX due to COVID-19. So we're going to divide these into two sections. One, scheduling your NCLEX, and two, changes to the actual NCLEX experience. Now the timeline for the US and Canada, because both students in the United States and in Canada take the same NCLEX. With this pandemic, both the RN and the PN exams were affected. So initially the testing centers were completely closed, and the changes I'm going to talk to you about today will be in place through July 2020. That's all we know. So these changes will apply through July 2020 as of April 10th, 2020. Now you might be wondering why these centers are open in a pandemic. Well, the reason is there is obviously an unprecedented need for nurses in the healthcare system. So that's why there's limited openings and special procedures in the testing centers. Now, Pearson VUE is the company that manages the testing centers. NCSBN is the National Council for State Boards of Nursing. They're the ones who they control the NCLEX, the content, the timing, the evaluation. So these two partners work together for your NCLEX experience. So just to clarify, NCSBN is the one who is responsible for the contents of the test, the passing standards, etc. Pearson VUE is the place where you go to actually take the test, and you have an account set up through them as you move through the process. Now there are limited center openings. So Pearson VUE, in working with the NCSBN, has opened a limited number of testing centers in major metropolitan areas across the United States and Canada. So the center where you had initially intended to take your test may or may not be available. You'll need to log onto your Pearson VUE account to check in your area. Now I've got this number, I've got the screen right there for you to see what it will look like. You can see in the lower left, it says register for NCLEX. And then on the lower right, you've got sign into your NCLEX account. That's where you will go to take a look and see what's available in the area near where you want to take your NCLEX. Now, some people who had scheduled between April 16th and April 30th were unscheduled because of the COVID-19 changes. If you want to check the status of your current appointment, if you've already been able to schedule an appointment, again, you'll need to log into your account. Now let's talk about what's going to happen due to social distancing. Pearson VUE centers and NCSBN want to honor the social distancing recommendations, and this is the difference you're going to see in a testing experience compared to somebody who took it in January of 2020. Now, computer adaptive testing will still be used. Remember, that's a decision made by the computer. If you answer the question correctly, it will give you a little bit harder question. If you answer it incorrectly, it will give you an easier question, and you're trying to keep that number above the passing standard. Now, the minimum number of test items will now be 60. The minimum number of test items in January of 2020 was 75, but 15 of those questions were practice questions. You didn't know which of those 15 were practice questions, but 15 of those were ones that NCSBN was just getting data on. So now, if your test shuts off at 60, that means you shut it off at the minimum number. Don't panic. It's different than what you've heard of all your peers and colleagues do. Your minimum number is now 60 versus when it used to be 75. Now, as they've lowered the minimum number, they've also lowered the maximum number. Remember, the goal is so you're not in the testing center for as long a period of time. So instead of going all the way to 265, the maximum will be 130. You also have a limited time since you have a fewer number of questions possible. Instead of 6 hours, you will have 4 hours. Now, here's what you want to know. The difficulty level and passing standard has not changed. So when you're preparing for your NCLEX, do the same things you planned on doing if the test had been not impacted by COVID. You just know these are some minor changes that you're going to experience. Fewer questions, shorter time, but the difficulty level and passing standard has not changed. Now let me give you some good news. The next generation NCLEX special research section will not be included. So people who took it in January would take their NCLEX exam, and then after that part was over, the part that determined if they were licensed or not, they took some additional, very complex in comparison, next generation NCLEX questions for the NCBSN to gather data. You won't experience those. Okay, so when you're taking it during these changes, the maximum your testing time will be is 4 hours. You won't have any of the 15 practice questions that everybody had, nor will you have additional next generation NCLEX questions. So in some ways, your experience is going to be a little better compared to what we've heard from people who were frustrated with taking those extra questions after taking their NCLEX. Now let's break that 4 hours down. You are going to still be able to have breaks during the NCLEX. So you'll have scheduled breaks. It will offer you a break after 2 hours and again after 3.5 hours of exam time. You can also take a break whenever you want to. So the scheduled breaks are optional. You can choose to take them or not take them. You can take an unscheduled break whenever you want to, but just keep in mind that all breaks, whether it's scheduled or an unscheduled break, counts against your total testing time of 4 hours. Now, everybody's been talking about PPE, but what about during the exam? Well, NCBSN has already come out and said, hey, face masks and gloves are considered a comfort aid and they don't need any type of pre-approval. This is really a big deal because sometimes proctors were serious about what you had in your hair, what type of earrings you had on, but now face masks and gloves are considered a comfort aid and do not need pre-approval. So you want to make sure that you contact your testing center where you're going to take the exam and determine if you need to bring your own or if they will supply them for you. My suggestion is they will likely supply them for you, but call just to be sure. Now, they've also stepped up their cleaning and disinfecting measures like we are in the rest of our society, but they're going to do the keyboards, locker fobs, and scanners in between test takers at a much more frequent level than before COVID-19. So I'm going to wrap up this video with the site. Here is where I want to refer you to if you have questions. If you can email nclexinfo@ncsbn.org, they can also give you official answers. But please understand there are multiple people trying to figure out what they're going to do for this test. And so it might take a while to get an email back. I recommend checking their websites often for the latest information.